What's up everybody, this is Ryan here, and in this video I'm going to be talking to you about using fragments as views in Model-View-ViewModel architecture. And we'll also look at how to use Kotlin Synthetic Properties to eliminate boilerplate UI code and refer directly to XML views. Now, how this is going to work is in this video we will write the fragment, and then of course in the next video we will write the view model, which our fragment currently talks to. Before we get to coding the fragment, I just wanted to talk about Model-View-ViewModel architecture for a moment. So as discussed in the second video in this series, and you should probably go and watch that if you haven't and you're curious about this particular pattern, there's a couple really subtle ways to do it differently which don't actually break the pattern entirely. So I won't be going into great detail on this, but basically what I'm saying here is the style of view model and view that we're going to be writing today is basically such that it allows the view to be very simple and easy to write and easy to test at the expense of moving a lot of the presentation logic of the view into the view model. It'll basically simplify construction of the view, but the key point here is the more details or the more presentation logic we include about a specific view in a view model, the less reusable the view model becomes. So what I'm saying here is if you have a view model which you plan to use for a variety of different views, you're going to want to take the other approach that I discussed, not the one where you have lots of details about the view in the actual view model. Just so there's no confusion about what I just said there, let's have a quick look at two different view models in this project. So the one we'll be writing today, the one that our fragment that we write today will be talking to, and the one we'll write in the next video, is the user view model. So the thing about this view model is, in keeping with the pattern, it does not directly reference any particular view. However, it does have, like I said before, specific details about a particular view. So we see fields in here like sign in status text, auth button text, satellite drawable. So as you can see, this view model is going to work really well with a particular view, but it's not necessarily going to be something that we can reuse with a whole bunch of different views. When I open up Note View Model, basically you will pretty much not see any specific details about a particular view within reason. So we're not going to see these show error state type functions. We are going to see things like note was deleted, note was updated, and we'll see that we do actually publish a note object to whatever observable is, whatever observer is listening. But the thing about this is, by taking this approach of having more reusable view models, we're now relying on the fragment or the view to basically handle this presentation logic. Okay, so if you would like to follow along with this tutorial, and I do suggest you do if you're going to watch it, then check out the description box down below. You'll find a link to the open source code repository, and you can either clone or download it. Anyways, what we'll be looking at first is how to configure Kotlin Synthetic Properties in Gradle. So the first thing you need to make sure is that you have the Kotlin Gradle plugin installed. This one here. Sorry, my word wrap is kind of screwing it up. So if you checkmarked the box that your project is supposed to be a Kotlin project in Android Studio, most likely you won't actually have to add this in manually. It should be there if you've configured a Kotlin project in a more recent version of Android Studio, but I just want to point this out in case there's any confusion. Secondly, one thing you probably will need to add is go ahead and open up the app level build Gradle file, and this is true for whatever module you might want to use the Kotlin Synthetic Properties in. You're just going to want to apply this particular plugin here, Kotlin Android Extensions Apply Plugin, and that will allow you to use Kotlin Synthetic Properties. So the view class that we'll be writing today is called LoginView, and I just want to make one more final note here. There are two functions in it, so in particular I'm talking about start sign-in flow and onActivityResult, and we're actually not going to be coding out those two functions, and the reason why is that I'm going to go over those when I talk about implementing Firebase with Google Sign-In Provider. So we won't be coding these two functions here in this video, but like I say, we'll get to that eventually. Okay, so what I would like you to do to get started here is you can either make a new file with a slightly different name for login view, because that's what we'll be rebuilding, or what you can do is you can just select everything under the package declaration here, just scroll down and have a good delete, and that will be our starting point for today's tutorial. Alright, so the first thing we'll be doing is we'll write out the class declaration. So go ahead and type class login view extends fragment, like so. Just line that up a little better. And of course we will have to import the appropriate library. So in my case I'm using the Android X library, so go ahead and pick that. So the next thing we'll need to do is we want to add a reference to our view model, and we'll have to use a late init var for that. Also in general, since I don't want anything else kind of messing around with this particular reference, we're going to make it private. Private basically just means that we can only see it in this particular class. Alright, so when we're working with fragments, we need to tell the fragment which layout to inflate. Now, if you're using data binding, there's a slightly different process for this, but what we're going to do today is we are going to override the onCreateView function, like so. And really appreciate that autocomplete there. Alright, so go ahead and select everything after this return statement here and delete that. So what we're going to do instead is we are going to inflate a specific layout. So we're going to take the passed in inflator and we're going to say inflator.inflate. And the resource we're going to give it is we're going to point to the fragments layout file. So we're going to type r.layout.fragment.login. Now it's going to be complaining because it wants to import R, so you can go ahead and do that. I just hit Alt-Enter there to import it, and that's satisfied that particular problem. And then we need to give the container, so this is where the view will be inflated into. And then we're going to type false for attach to root. Now this particular option, false for attach to root, can be a little bit confusing for people, but just understand that most of the time you want to leave it false, and it will still actually appropriately add our fragment to the activities view hierarchy, so don't worry about it. Anyways, what we'll do next is we'll begin writing out our onStart function. So again, I'm going to type override fun onStart, like so. And so what we need to do at this point is we're going to already start to refer to a couple different views in the XML layout from our onStart function here. So what we need to do is we need to set up our synthetic functions. Now luckily this is like seriously one of the easiest things to do ever once you've added the library, as we discussed before. So all you need to do is just go up to your import statements here. So what we're going to write is we're going to type import Kotlin X.Android.synthetic.main.fragment login.asterisk. So in case you're curious, the asterisk is basically saying whatever is a, for lack of a better term, member of fragment login, then we want to import all of those things. So effectively what that's going to do is if I open up fragment login here, which is the actual view, oh, that took a while to load. So basically what's going to happen is we can now refer explicitly to these particular view IDs. We don't need to do any findViewById stuff. All we need to do is just add in the appropriate layout and we're good to go. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we are going to assign our view model. Now we'll type the code out here by hand, but I'm actually going to be covering how to actually set the dependency injection and ViewModelProvider stuff up in a different video. So if you're curious about how to do this in more detail, I will eventually get to that. Covering a lot of stuff in this tutorial. So what we can do is we're going to type ViewModel, of course referring to our reference above. Then we're going to say equals ViewModelProviders with an S of, and then for this particular thing, let's just go ahead and import that so it stops screaming at me. We're going to type this, passing in our fragment. Again, I'm not going to go into detail about this. We're just going to type this out. All right, and then we'll type login injector which is a custom written dependency injection class which extends Android ViewModel. So when we do that, we need to type require activity. This might be a new function for some people around here. I'll get into that when I talk about this particular code in the other tutorial, but this is kind of a handy little function that's been added somewhat recently. And then we're going to refer to that's going to get our activity, and then we get the application. And then once that happens, there's one function in this particular class, login injector, which is provide user view model factory, like so. Now we're not totally done yet because we've configured that aspect, and now what we need to do is we need to type .get on our view model providers, and then we're going to pass the specific view model that we require here. So we're going to type user view model, which is the view model that we will be talking to. And we need to kind of refer to the class file here. So what we're going to do is we're going to type class.java, like so. This is one of the things about Kotlin, when you need to reference a particular Java class, the syntax for it is kind of wonky, but whatever, it works. So that's all we need to do to assign our view model. Our first order of business now is going to be starting the background animation. So if I briefly look at the layout that we're rating the fragment for, or vice versa, you understand what I mean. It has a background which is like a space background basically, and in the application it actually kind of animates. If you're wondering how I did that, I did cover vector drawables and animations in a particular video in this series. I'm sure you're tired of hearing that, but yeah, go and watch that video if you want to figure out how to do that in detail. So we're going to need to cast it as an animation drawable, so type brackets first. And then what we'll type is root fragment, root fragment, there we go, holy crap, that was pathetic. And then, so what we need to do is we want to get a hook to the background of this layout, the space loop drawable here. So what we can do is we're going to type root fragment login, so we're referring specifically to this layout. And then we're going to type dot background, which is going to return a normal drawable. Now, the thing we have in this drawable is actually an animation list. So what we can do is we're going to type animation drawable is what I meant. Animation drawable, okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to type dot start with fade. So immediately you're going to be wondering, Ryan, what the hell is start with fade? So it's actually just an extension function that I wrote in this project. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-N and we'll type Android. And then there's a file called Android Extensions in the common package. And you'll notice it has this particular function here, start with fade. So all it does is instead of having to repeatedly write this code out, I've just pulled that code out and put it in an extension function, which just means that I can just type start with fade and instead of having to type this crap here. So there's no magic. There's the magic of Kotlin extension functions, which I really like, but there's nothing too crazy going on here. So the next thing we'll do is we will set up our click listeners and kind of bind them to the view model appropriately. So since there's a couple of lines in that function, or there's a number of things we need to do in order to set that up, we're going to create a helper function. So we're just going to call this thing set up click listeners. I've got my keyboard in an awkward position and it's just ruining my typing skills. My apologies. Set up click listeners, like so. And then I'm just going to click on that, hit Alt-Enter, create function, and that's going to build it down there. And then this is what we'll do next. So like I said before, now that we have Kotlin Synthetic Properties set up, we can just refer directly to the XML IDs. So the first one we're going to assign is the auth button. So that's going to be this button in particular here, the thing that currently says sign out, but what it says changes frequently. So we're going to type btn_auth attempt, let it autocomplete, .set onClickListener, and we're going to give it a Lambda expression here. And so what we want to do when this onClickListener fires, it's going to basically call the code in our Lambda. That's how this kind of works. In that event, we want to type ViewModel.handleEvent. So this is basically like a generic function, which you'll see in all of my view models. And how they work, let me just pull the code up really quickly here. Type base view model. So we'll go into more detail about this in the next video, but just so you understand what's going on here, we have this abstract function, handle event, and it takes some particular type. So let's have a quick look at the view model itself that we're going to be working with. That's again going to be user view model. And just notice that it extends base view model, and the generic type which I pass for each given view model is some particular kind of sealed class which represents different events. I know this is a lot, but just understand that what this login event thing does is it basically just represents different events which could possibly propagate from a particular view or a set of views. So I just wanted to show you the code really quickly so you know what's going on here. Anyways, back to our view. So we're going to call our ViewModel.handle event function, and what we're going to pass to that is login event.onAuthButtonClick. So this is basically our way of telling the user view model, hey, someone just clicked the auth button, so you need to do something. So that's not the only thing we need to assign here. We're also going to basically make it so that if the user hits the back button, then it's going to start the list activity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type imb toolbar back is what it's called, .set onClickListener. There we go. Again, Lambda that shit. Pardon my language. And then what we're going to do is we're going to type start list activity. So this is actually a function we will code. So I'm just going to hit Alt Enter, create function start list activity down below. So we're going to use Kotlin single expression syntax. So we're going to type require activity again, .start activity. And in our start activity block, we're just going to go ahead and create an intent. So we're going to say intent. And then in this intent, we're going to type activity, which is basically the activity for this particular fragment. And then we're going to type where we want to get to, which is note activity. And then we'll do our handy reference a Java class syntax like so. And that'll need to be imported. Okay, so with that, when someone hits the back button, they're going to be sent to the note activity. Now, some of you may be wondering, hey, I thought you were using navigation in this particular library. Well, actually, because of limitations, which I discussed in the video where I covered the navigation library, we do use the navigation library, but not in this particular feature of the application. And the reason is because it doesn't play nice with onActivity result. Okay, so we're almost done with our setup ClickListeners function. There's just one more thing we need to do. We need to intercept on back pressed, and the reason for that is just because of the awkward integration with the navigation library, which is not really my fault. So we're going to type require activity, and then we're going to type that add on back pressed callback. I can't talk today for some reason. So we're going to have to monkey around with this a little bit. So we're going to basically put some parentheses here around our lambda. We will still need the lambda expression. So for the first parameter, we're going to type view lifecycle owner, and that's a property of our fragment here. So if you're wondering where that's coming from, that's where it's coming from. And then we need to create an on back pressed callback from our lambda. So we're going to type on back pressed callback. Actually auto completed this time. That was handy. And then what we'll do inside of this on back pressed callback is we're going to type start list activity. And this thing's complaining because this function must return a Boolean, and the Boolean that we'll be returning is true. So the reason why we return true here is because we're basically telling the operating system, hey, don't worry about handling that back click event. We've got it covered. Don't do your thing. Anyways, let's move on here. So the next thing we'll do is we're going to write our basically another helper function called observe-view-model. And what this particular function is going to do is we are going to observe some view models. So I'm just going to hit Alt-Enter, create function down below. So basically what we're going to be doing here is we want our view to pretty much attach to, if I can find it here, pretty much every publicly visible observable that our user view model possesses. So basically what that's going to look like is we're going to be typing view model. So the first one we'll do is sign in status text fragments.observe. So we're going to pass view lifecycle owner, which is a property of this fragment, so it knows to pay attention to that particular lifecycle. And then we're going to create an observer Lambda function. And so again, this is basically just what do we do when this particular observable publishes data. So how do we handle the data? And this is where this particular style of view model is really quite handy, because basically all we do is we just bind it directly to whatever gets passed in. So in this case, I'll type up here that if you don't understand how Lambda syntax works, just understand that whatever gets passed in here is inferred to be this variable called it. So for the first one, I'll actually give it a different name than it. We're just going to call this text. And then I'm going to hit the arrow thingy here. And then we're going to type, we're going to leave it like that. And that's going to assign the name text instead of just using IT. I'm just doing this so hopefully you kind of understand what's going on. So this particular field that we're working with here basically dictates what is displayed in this text view down here. I know that's hard to see, but this basically login status display down here. So what we can do is we can refer to that particular view. So LBL login status display. Then we're going to get its text property, and we're going to assign that to text. So for the rest of them, we're going to use the it syntax, but I just wanted to demonstrate that here in case anyone's confused about that. I did do a video about that. What does it mean in Kotlin? So you can go and check that out if you like. So what we'll do is we'll type out another observable here. So we're going to type ViewModel.auth button text. So this is going to be the text for this button here that currently says sign out. And it's the same process here, so we're going to type observe, give it the view lifecycle owner, give it a hook to our fragments lifecycle, and then we're going to give it another observer. And in that observer, so now we're referring to btn auth attempt, and then we're going to say .text equals it. So the rest of this observe view model function is just a whole bunch more LiveData.observe functions. So there's nothing really new there, and I don't think there's actually any point in us typing that code out together. What I'm going to suggest is if you would like to practice, maybe try implementing the rest of this function yourself. And what you need to do is you basically just need to write one of these statements, one of these observe statements for basically everything you see here. Now, just one important thing to note, these two LiveData observables here, as opposed to, well, actually this one does affect the user interface, but this one in particular is actually just a way to communicate back to the view based on what happens in a particular auth state. So we're going to learn a little bit more about that in the next video where we actually write out this view model. But yeah, that's basically all I wanted to cover in this particular tutorial. Alright, so that's it for our educational information on fragments. Two more points I wanted to discuss. So some people might be wondering why I'm not using data binding. So I'm not saying don't use data binding. The reason why I don't in particular is kind of twofold. Number one, I'm not a big fan of doing anything extra in XML if I don't have to. However, some people do prefer to work with a more declarative language. That's totally fine if that's your preference. The other thing is that since my code tends to be looked at by a huge number of different developers, and I'm going to guess that the majority of them have no idea how data binding works, just from experience that's been the case. The other thing I wanted to mention is there was quite a few different little tricks in Kotlin that we went through in this particular video. Just so you're aware, I have put together a course on the fundamentals of application programming with Kotlin. Link in the description box down below. And in that course, I cover pretty much everything I talked about here, even including some of the stuff I didn't go into detail on, like sealed classes, our base view model abstract class, all kinds of good stuff like that, single expression syntax, Lambda expressions. So do consider checking it out if you'd like to support the channel and learn how to use Kotlin really well. So that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching, and peace out.